Hello and welcome to another episode of Raw Chatter. I am your host speaking, Vicky Midwood, the Human Health Optimizer and the Addiction Eliminator. And I am really excited today because I have got a wonderful guest with me. Jarrod and I met via networking, and he has got an incredible story that I've asked him to share with you guys. He is a business consultant who has had his own journey with addiction, and he is more than happy to share his story with you. So, Jarrod, I really want to say thank you for doing this. I do appreciate it. And over to you.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me on. It's a real privilege. It's amazing the people you meet along the way in business, but also in recovery as well. I'm kind of 2.5 or 2 3/4 years into my recovery journey now, and for a long time I wasn't happy talking about it. I felt it was something to kind of hide, and there's a bit of stigma attached to it. And so it's only probably in the last year really I've been comfortable with it. And so when we kind of met, it just felt very natural to talk about recovery. And then it's nice to be able to to come on things like this and talk about how recovery is possible. We don't get to a stage in recovery. Sorry, go on, Vicky.
That's a really important point that you've just brought up there, is that it does take a little while into that recovery journey for you to get over your own stigma, shame, all of those kind of emotions. You've got to kind of process and deal with them, I think, haven't you, first, before you can then feel comfortable enough to talk about it. And if anybody is listening and they are in their first year of recovery, I think that's an important lesson or message for them to hear. It's okay if you don't feel ready to talk about it just yet, and you will let go of that shame and that stigma over time. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a really important point. That's why I thought I'd make it early, because when you do get over it and you do start to talk to people, the one thing I found is I was expecting the reactions that the TV tells you that you expect, the people, looking down on you or ignoring you or not wanting to speak to you anymore. And actually the opposite is the truth, really, that everybody, bar none, has been so supportive and so understanding and interested in the story as well. And I think the other important point there, and this is how we got to meet, was when you do tell people about your journey, I'd say 8-9 times out of 10 people go, I know her, and they know somebody either in the family, or they've been affected themselves, or they know a friend or a colleague. And so, addiction is such a non-discriminatory and also so prevalent that, people don't realize it's happening. But, everybody in some way has probably been affected by it. And so I think, it's really important to talk about the journey as well, because if it can help one person just by talking about it, then it's well worth that sacrifice of a little bit of guilt and shame overcoming. And it helps me as well, because the more I talk about it, the more I can accept that I was affected by a disease. I'm not weak. I'm not pathetic. I'm not all these things, again, that society tells us that addicts are. I'm a reasonably intelligent chap, and, I used to think I was sort of invincible and a bit streetwise, and, kind of, if it happened to me, it can happen to anyone, is the answer. And you'll know yourself, Vicky, we talked about this, that it really is so non-discriminatory. When you mix in recovery circles, you meet everybody, young people, old people, black people, white people, religious people, non-religious, rich, but it doesn't matter. Addiction affects everybody.
All walks of life. All statuses, all cultures, literally, I mean, doctors, solicitors to dustmen and shop workers, it doesn't make a difference, does it? No. But as you say, we get painted this picture thanks to TV programs and films, and a lot of people actually feel relieved, I think, when they hear somebody like you or I share our story, because they can recognize other people around them who actually, they may go, oh, maybe they've got a problem. Perhaps I should be a little bit more considerate and understanding. But also it can highlight that maybe I might have an issue that perhaps I need to be aware of, and perhaps I don't need to be embarrassed about talking about it. So I think, as you say, it's to be able to talk about this stuff much more openly now, and to help people to realize that you're unlikely to get the reaction that you think you're going to get.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you've touched on a really important point there, is that when you do talk about it, and I guess, you know, I take myself back to my early days in recovery, I thought I was the only person that struggled and suffered with this. And, you know, again, we think of addiction as being an enjoyable experience. I think people think you probably just partied a bit too hard and you probably just enjoyed yourself a bit too much. And, you know, I can tell you, well, I don't need to tell you, you know, Ricky, but, you know, there was no party going on. You know, certainly the last year, probably 18 months of my addiction, there was no party. It was very, very lonely, very, very isolated, full of self-loathing and self-doubt. And when it gets you to that stage, you know, your self-worth is out of the window. So you're absolutely right in that point, is, you know, if people are struggling, or you think people are struggling, is to give them a little bit of understanding, because they are suffering at that point. There's no enjoyment happening. And, you know, for, you know, my journey, it's probably worth talking about. My journey started very, very, very early. You know, I had a bad accident when I was 6 years old, and I was quite badly scarred, and, you know, my legs were sort of disfigured because of it. And then growing up through that gave me a lot of issues around, again, self-worth, and about feeling different to other kids, and feeling that people were always staring at me and looking at me, and I felt very different. And, you know, that then drove behaviors that I didn't even realize until later on in life, you know, around, you know, imposter syndrome and things like that I really struggled with, you know, particularly later in my career, were linked way back to that situation, you know, when I was 6 years old. Wow. And it was only having therapy and going through, you know, the sort of the 12-step process that you start to analyze and start to think back as, you know, how have I got to this point? And and I think that's the other thing to take into consideration, that everybody's had some sort of a journey. Nobody gets to a position of addiction because they want to. You know, they've got there probably because because they're struggling with things. I'm just going to close this door, mate. Because they've struggled with things that have brought them to this point. And, you know, there's a lot of, quite often, again, working with a lot of people in recovery now, there's always the self-doubt, there's always the self-worth issues, and people turn to drink and drugs, or other addictions. You know, it's not just about drink and drugs, gambling, sex, shopping, there's all sorts of things but ultimately the same mental process goes on, that you're using something that, you know, takes you away from the real feelings you've got inside. And, you know, I was reasonably successful in my career. You know, I got to position of sort of sales and marketing director in, you know, reasonable sized companies, and responsible for a lot of people. And, you know, that should have been the absolute pinnacle of my career when I got to those points, but it really wasn't. You know, it almost destroyed me, because to me, I was still that 6-year-old boy in my head that struggled with self-image and self-worth, and I was always thinking that people didn't respect me, or didn't kind of understand where I was coming from, or thought of me differently. You know, I was the master at doing other people's thinking for them. I was brilliant at that. You know,
mind reading. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I was a master at mind reading. So any conversation I had, I was thinking, he's thinking I'm an idiot. Or, you know, I'd stand up and present in front of, you know, 100 people, and I'd be thinking, every one of them was thinking, what's this dickhead doing on stage? Why is he talking to us? What's he got to? So that's that imposter syndrome, that self-doubt was, the higher I got up in my career, the worse that I got, you know, to the point where, you know, I sat in a boardroom with people who I thought were brilliant, and I'd be looking around the room thinking, he's fantastic. My God, he's clever. Wow, that's amazing. What the hell am I doing here? There's a point where sometimes I'd freeze and I wouldn't be able to speak, and I'm thinking, I know what to say here, but I'm not going to say it because they're going to think I'm stupid. And then someone else would say it, and I think, damn, and everyone go, that was a brilliant idea. And I think, I'm going to say that 20 minutes ago, but I didn't. And that's where it got me. And then for me, you know, I was always I wouldn't say a big drinker, but, you know, I always drank well sociably. But, you know, as I kind of got into that stage in my
I like the way you've put that. I think I'm just gonna pull back one just a really important point that you made there, is you were successful. And to the outside world, everybody looking at you probably thought, you know, I want to be like him. He's got all his shit together, he's high up, he knows what he's doing, blah, 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 blah. And this is where you also said, you know, set out to be an addict. It comes upon you kind of almost insidiously. And it's not that you're consciously going, oh, I feel resentful because he got in with that comment before I did. I'm going to drink on it. That is not what happens.
No.
It's none of that. But I think you also said that you were part of that culture, as was I, where work hard, play hard. And this expectation that I think is still really, really prevalent in the workforce is that you have to keep on striving to be better than.
Yes.
And that's a lot of pressure. And as you said, that we call it imposter syndrome, but ultimately it boils down to you not feeling as good as and wanting to feel better than so that you can feel good enough.
Yeah.
And to people who don't necessarily feel that way, although I think more people do than we realize, they just don't admit it to themselves. And a lot of people walk through their working life and to some degree their married life with their partner feeling very unsure of who am I, what am I doing, and if I just do more and try and prove myself. But as you said, it takes its toll and you start to look to external things like alcohol. So you were quite good at drinking.
Yeah, but I never had a particular problem with drink. It was when cocaine got involved for me that that was my downfall, because it very quickly for me went from it was never really a social thing. I did it socially, but what I found with it was for me is it took me out of my head, literally and figuratively, I guess. But it stopped me thinking. It stopped me having those thoughts and those self-doubts, and it was great for that. And again, you made a really good point before that it creeps up on you. Because I mentioned I thought I was invincible. I thought I could do these things on my own. No one needed to know about this. This was my thing that I did on my own to relax. It kind of took me out of having to think about anything. And then bit by bit, it takes over. To the point where it's all you can do and it's all you think about. And we touched earlier on in the conversation about that. TV view of an addict, and to me, I couldn't be an addict because I had a job, I had a house, I'd never robbed anybody, I'd never slept in a bus shelter, I'd never done the thing that EastEnders tells you that addicts do. So to me, I've got this all under control. This is absolutely fine, because I can't remember, we talked about this when we first met, but to me, I always talk about addiction as almost being like a sentient being in your brain. It talks to you. It tells you things. It reassures you that everything's okay. You've got this under control. It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's perfectly fine to still be up at 4 o'clock in the morning when you've got work in 2 hours. Yeah. That's you're okay because you can have 2 hours sleep. You'll be okay. Well, of course you're not gonna sleep if you've been doing that all night. But this thing in your head tells you this everything's okay, and then you swear to you, I'm not doing that again. I'm done with this now. I can't do it anymore. And then come 11 o'clock, you start to feel okay, and you'll have a cup of tea and a bit of toast, and you're not ate for 3 days, and you think, well, actually, you know what? I could probably get away with it again today if I just do a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
It's always a little bit, and again, in sort of addiction circles, we talk about this a lot, that progression and that unmanageability, powerlessness, all these phrases that you hear in recovery circles. And that powerlessness for me was the thing that I cottoned onto early in recovery. Was I was absolutely powerless, because those thoughts would tell me everything's okay, and it would go from, okay, I'll just do a little bit, to I laugh about this because it's the progression. I'll just do a little bit. It's 11 o'clock in the morning, but I'll just do a little bit, and again, your thing in your head tells you that's absolutely fine at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Right. And it's such an important point that you're making there, because we're not deluded. And as you said, we're not stupid. We're smart people. But the stories that we create to help us to believe that we are actually in control of it. Yeah. And these are reasonable and sensible excuses. That's what we're convincing ourselves. Yeah. But actually, deep down inside, there's a part of us that knows it's not really the right thing to do, and we're not really in control. But that bit, we don't even hear it until the progression gets to a certain level where suddenly you were in control. and then it almost like flips, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. You don't think that there's a problem going on, and you don't believe that you're walking down this path that you see other people doing, because they're stupid, they're pathetic. You're in control, and you don't want to admit these things to yourself until you hit that point where everybody hits that point in recovery where you just think, I can't do this anymore. I'd lost a couple of jobs by this point, not directly because of my using, but certainly as a result of, if that makes any sense. I wasn't performing, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. Right. I took a job when I was kind of right at the deep end of addiction, and then went into recovery. So I kind of straddled the two things, and it was an incredibly difficult time. My marriage fell apart, and at the same time, and I was also then dealing with the things, from my past, of coming to terms with that. So for me, it was almost a perfect storm of everything was happening. And the one thing that took me away from that was the thing that was ultimately killing me. And I got to that point. And as you said, I'm a reasonably intelligent chap, but that seemed absolutely fine.
Yeah.
To do that, because I created this, you talk about that web of lies that you tell yourself, never mind other people outside of your sphere. And
again, you've just brought up a really important point there, because we're turning to it as a solution. You've got all of these things going on, and here's this thing that's going to offer you just a little bit of relief, a little bit of respite, a little bit of courage, and the belief that you can get through it. If you just take this thing, you'll be okay. And this is how it kind of gets you, because it does work, and that's the problem. If it didn't work, we wouldn't keep doing it, but it does, until you realize that actually that in and of itself now is becoming a big problem. But to start with, it's not, is it? And this is why we can carry on like this for a number of years, until things do basically begin to unravel. And then once the unraveling starts, it's a little bit like pulling a stitch, isn't it?
Yeah.
It kind of all seems to unravel in one go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. It's that progression, and go back to that point you made, that as relatively intelligent people, we don't think this is happening to us along the way until you get to that point. And again, it's only now that I'm sort of in recovery, and I've gone through the various sort of steps of the process, that I see the things I was doing now. I can look back and think, oh my God, those the things that we talk about powerlessness. You're powerless over drink or drugs or whatever your addiction is, and that's I thought to be an addict I had to use every day, all day, and I wasn't doing that. It was turned out most days in the end, but certainly in the middle bit. So I didn't think I could be an addict, but it's that we talk about quite a lot that once you've had one, there is no concept of stop. That's one of the markers, if you like to call it a marker of addiction. And that was for me. There was no concept of one, or I'll just get a bit. I tell myself that's what I was doing, but once I started, I wasn't stopping for days. And it was it kind of got to that point.
And I think, so many people can recognize themselves in certain things that potentially they don't think are an addiction, but that's kind of quite a good barometer, isn't it? Can you stop at one? Because there's a well-known saying in the recovery spaces, isn't there, that one is too many and 1,000 isn't enough. And that is, and it is so true. But when you're in it, you genuinely believe in and of that moment that you can just have the little bit, until you then go 2 or 3 hours later, I just have a little bit. And that's kind of how it gets you, isn't it? You either using more, or you're using more often.
Yes, and for me, both of those things became true, certainly towards the end, and I can laugh about these things now, because when you look back, and again, we talk about, the things we did and believe were okay, is when you say them out loud now on this side, you think, oh my God, did I really do that? Because it shows you, we talk about insanity a lot, don't we, in recovery circles, the insanity of addiction and where it takes you. And, I think, I'd do that process where you go, I'm just going to get a little bit. And then, I'd ring the dealer and go, can I have 4? And I think, why have I just said 4? And then when I actually met him and say, actually, while I'm here, I might as well have 10. And that's that's where it gets you. It's just, absolute madness. And again, when you say it out loud and people listening who aren't in addiction probably think, well, that's just ridiculous. It is, but that's the point of it. That's where addiction takes you. And that's where I think for people who either feel that they may be on that pathway or know somebody who is, and as you said, it's a good barometer of, once you have one, can you stop? And once you tell yourself you're having one, do you really just have one, or does it become 2, 5, 6, 10? In very quick time. But I think for me, we've got war stories, and I'm sure we could both tell each other stories that will make your toes curl. But we probably won't do that on this one today. But I think the important point for me is that recovery is absolutely possible. I hit that point where I couldn't go on. I'd have been happy dying at that point, when I kind of hit my rock bottom. And the way I always describe it, if death had walked in the door on that morning, I would have happily hugged him. I was done. I was absolutely done. But something made me pull through and think I need to get some help. And for me, I thought rehab was something that was for rich people and for famous people and things, and that's absolutely not true. Having worked in a rehab for a little while last year, it is for normal people, but I didn't think it was. So again, I think a point from this conversation for people who are listening is rehab is for everybody. It is possible. But for me, I went straight into the rooms of Cocaine Anonymous, and I think an only important point around the stigma of addiction is it's not very well advertised. There's not a lot of information out there for normal people when you get to that point. Now, luckily, I'd heard of Cocaine Anonymous almost in passing in a conversation I'd had years ago, and so I knew Alcoholics Anonymous existed, but I didn't know Alcoholics Anonymous was also for drugs. In the same way that people who go into Cocaine Anonymous don't realise that people going there for alcohol or Narcotics Anonymous. All those fellowships are inclusive. I guess their prime focus is on what it says on the tin. Addiction, addiction is addiction. In the rooms I go in, there are people who've never took a drink or a drug in their life. They're addicted to other things.
Correct.
But the process of recovery is the same. The addiction process is the same. What that addiction is covering or hiding is the same. And so, for me, again, I would encourage anybody to have a look on things like the AA site or the CA websites, because for me there was a questionnaire that was on there, and I was looking for reasons I wasn't an addict.
And how many times do we do that? I mean, hands up. I must have done so many online quizzes and bought so many books and gone, I'm buying this to prove to myself that I'm not. And then if I didn't get that proof, I'll find another one.
Absolutely. So I did one of the quizzes online that asked you a lot. Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? These kind of questions. And there was 2 or 3 out of 15 that I answered no to, and I thought, well, that means I'm not an addict then, because I've not answered yes to them all. And then at the bottom it said, if you've answered yes to one of these questions, you're probably an addict. It was like, oh, okay.
Darn it! I thought I'd done well.
And so I rang the helpline and spoke to a chap on there who was laughing, and I was thinking, what's he laughing at? What's funny about this? But he was in recovery, and I again thought that CA was a very well, not that it's not well organised, but I thought it was organised by professional people, by counsellors, and actually the anonymous programs are run by people like us, for people like us, people like we were, I guess. And he was, joking about, oh, do you ever find yourself doing this? And do you ever find this has happened? And I was like, yeah, do you do that too? And going back to that point from earlier, we think we're the only ones going through this. And for me, I was the only one who'd ever done any of these ridiculous things. And then this chap started telling me about the things he'd done. And he was I think he was about 4 or 5 years clean and sober. And that one conversation gave me hope, made me think, actually, this is possible then, because this guy has done the same as me, arguably worse, some of the things we talked about, but now he's not, and now he's laughing about it. This guy's having a good life, and that almost got me hooked immediately that actually I can feel some hope here. And so I went to CA meetings, and again, as we talked about, you look around the room, and there was everybody in that room. But again, to me, I'm still looking for a reason not to be there, obviously. So I'm looking at people thinking,
I don't belong here. I'm
not like them. I'm not one of these. I can't be one of these people. But then when people started talking and sharing their story, very quickly got to the point where I was thinking, actually, I am absolutely one of these people, because they're all sharing my story, to the point where I'm still a bit paranoid, early days. And I'm thinking, this is a plant. There's somebody knows me in here. And they're all making these stories up to sound like me. But actually, everyone had done the same. Addiction follows a very, very similar path. Everyone's journey is slightly different. Every context is slightly different. But actually, that pathway through to the point where you hit rock bottom is very similar. And again, in that room, then I heard people sharing their stories, which were my story, and they were recovered. They were months, days, years clean. And that gave me hope. That made me think, actually, that this is doable. And it took a while. Again,
I'm just going to jump in there, because I think it's so important that you've shared so many nuggets about just what it feels like to kind of be in the rooms for the very first time. And that genuine feeling of, I am not one of these people. And it's purely because of societal conditioning and this preconceived idea of what we've been led to believe an addict looks like, sounds like, etc. But also that you've mentioned it a couple of times, and it's so important that when we're going through it, and it's what I think for a lot of people is the very thing that keeps us in it for longer, is this belief that we're the only person going through this, and nobody else will understand. And how can I even start to explain it? But when you have a conversation with somebody who's been where you are now and come through it, and you hear them talking about the stuff that you thought you'd never going to say out loud because it's so embarrassing and shameful, and they're laughing about it, that hope is just such a real feeling, isn't it? And this is the power of community and being in this whole group environment of people who have done what you have done. And this is where I was very much, I don't want to be a part of. I'm very much a person who keeps myself to myself, and I can sort myself out. And the truth is, it is so much easier when you do it with other people, because you suddenly go, oh my God, she's done that. He's done that. I used to say that to myself in my head. Oh my God. And this is where you suddenly go, so I'm not a lunatic, and I'm not mad, and I'm not sad, and I'm not bad. And as you said, there is hope. I can do something about it. Brilliant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's very humbling as well, because you hear people's stories, and it really does humble you, and it breaks down your prejudices as well. For me, I was probably quite I don't know, self-opinionated probably is a good word of people, and I would judge people, but and I always tell this one story of one of my first meetings. There was a lady in the room, and she was a bit scruffy, and I was thinking, again, that's not me. When I heard her story, it absolutely floored me, because she grew up extremely poor, very underprivileged, never had clothes. So the fact that she was even wearing clothes today, to her, was an absolute miracle. And that absolutely battered my prejudices, because you don't know somebody's story. And when you hear some people's backstories in the rooms, and again, you'll know this, they're absolutely heartbreaking. And you just think, oh my God, for the grace of God, and it really does make you humble to people around you. And I think then as you go into recovery, it changes your life. It's changed my life. It's changed the way I view people. And actually, going into from a business point of view, it's the reason why I set my business up. I'm now, doing a course in counselling as well, because I see that, I took some therapy as well, and it really helped me. And I think, if I can give somebody something at some point in their life that stops them getting to the point that I got to, then I can do some good in the world. And, I set my business up because, it's a commercial enterprise. Of course it is. I still need to pay my mortgage. But for me, being a consultant is very much about people. It's a people first approach within business. I want to help people not get to the point I got in business, where I felt that I was being consumed by this self-doubt. So if I can help the people in businesses realize that, okay, you might be running a business, but you know what, you're a person first, and let's help you sleep a little bit at night without all these doubts. For me, that's what it's about, because the humility that recovery has given me about understanding people and where they've come from. I guess it's been one of the big takeaways for me. And I see the world and people very differently now, because, again, I'm probably the first person to see someone begging outside of Astra thinking he just wants drugs, this kid. And now I see people in the rooms who used to sleep outside Asda, and you hear the backstory, how they got there, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. And so now, I see people very differently. That people have a path in life that they don't necessarily want to be on.
Yeah,
but
so true.
The beauty about recovery, in whichever way you take recovery, whether it's through a rehab centre, whether it's through the rooms, whether it's through your local drug and alcohol service or addiction services, if it's not drug and alcohol, there is hope out there. I think that's the message that I want people to take, is that there is always hope. There is a way out of this. When I came from that place of absolute devastation, my life was burnt to the ground through my own doing. I'm not taking, no one gets blamed for that apart from me. But I've managed to rebuild that now, and I've managed to. I live a life now that I'm at peace. I think it's probably the first time in my life I can say I'm actually at peace. I put my head on the pillow every night and think today's been okay. And don't get me wrong, some days aren't okay, but I am. I get my head on the pillow every night, and I'm okay. And I haven't, done anything ridiculous that day. And for me, that's all I could ask for, is just to be at peace at life, and try to give other people a little bit of peace as well. And my family trusts me now, and they're not worried about me. My mum's not worried about the phone call that she's going to get. And whilst my marriage fell apart, we have a good relationship, and I'm a good father to my children, because I can be there for them and I'm fully present. I can be there for myself and for building a bit. I couldn't have built a business 3 years ago.
I think it's such an important point. Well, you've made many important points there, but I just I'm going to ask you a question first, and I'll come back to the points that you've made, because I think it's important that you also mentioned you went to therapy as well as going through the rooms. And it's important to say that for some people that is very important, because a lot of the childhood stuff that you mentioned had a big effect, and you didn't even realize it on how you were showing up and who you were being as a grown-up. But I also think it's important to emphasize that you don't just show up to the meetings and go into the rooms and hear stories. You actually have work to do. And that you went through the same process as I did, which was we went through the 12 steps. But you don't have to go through 12 steps. There are other programs that are out there that will basically help you to work through the reasons why we turned to certain things as a solution. And so it's not just a case of show up and talk about it. And I think it's important that people know that. You said it completely transformed your life because you did the work, and I did as well. And we have to, I think it would be remiss of us to just say, you go to this group and you talk about it and it's all fine, because there's a lot of stuff that you learn about yourself that perhaps you didn't want to face. And you didn't want to see. But it's an important part of you being able to now talk about it like we both can, without sounding like we want you to feel sorry for us, or without sounding like it's all my fault and I was a terrible person. And we're not playing the blame game. We're not playing the victim game. We're just kind of going, this is how it was. And now I understand. And this is who I was. And now I'm not, because. And I think it's so important you mentioned that. But also the other thing is that you also brought up the fact that without doing that work, you would have no way been in a position to build a business for yourself. And I think that's so important too, because building a business, as any business owner knows, is not easy. But when you've had addiction in your background and had imposter syndrome and all of the other stuff that you've had to work through, you would have definitely struggled to make it a success, wouldn't you?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, I wouldn't have had the confidence to do it. I wouldn't have had the self-belief to do it. I wasn't in a physical or a mental state to do it. Never mind, the other bits on there. But absolutely, I wouldn't be sat here now. Had I not found recovery. And again, the point you made is so important, that whatever way you go through your recovery journey is a program of action. You don't just recover. You have to put yourself into it. And a really important point is that honesty. You have to hold a mirror up to yourself, and you have to be really honest with yourself about where you've come from and why you got to that point as well, and what the things within your life that have troubled you. You have to hold a mirror up to it, and you have to be honest with yourself and continue to be honest with yourself afterwards. And that's the important thing. Again, you don't just get into recovery, I think, well, I've held the mirror up now.
Done it now.
Again. You know, it's an everyday thing. You have to say, you know, have I done the right thing today?
Yeah.
And you know, am I putting myself in jeopardy? You know, am I putting myself in harm's way, or other people in harm's way? So you're absolutely right. That program of action is constant and ongoing. And the other point you made, which is important, about you don't just turn to the rooms, get recovered, and then wander off into the distance. You know, part of this is doing things like this. Is that, you know, we can show other people, and we can demonstrate, you know, in real terms, that recovery is absolutely possible, and there are different ways of recovery. There are different things that work for different people.
Yeah.
But one of the most powerful and probably the most important is the sharing of your journey, because then other people see that hope, and other people who, you know, maybe thinking, God, I can't see a way out of this. There absolutely is a way out of it. There absolutely is a way to recover. Recovery is absolutely possible. And we talk about a life beyond your wildest dreams quite a lot. And, you know, within that, we're not talking about a helicopter and a Porsche sat on the front drive, you know, and things like that. You know, life beyond my wildest dreams is waking up in the morning. Well, going to bed is a good start, but waking up in the morning and thinking, I'm okay.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word peace, and I think that's such an important thing, because there was one word that stood out for me, especially when I first started to go into the rooms, and I'll hold my hand up. I didn't even know what the word meant, and it was serenity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's in that serenity prayer, and I would say the word, but I didn't know what it meant. I'd never even experienced it. And serenity and peace are not quite the same, but they're sort of similar.
Yeah.
And to be able to now actually understand, because I experience it on a daily basis, is quite something. To not even having a clue what it meant, no, never mind what it could feel like. Yeah. And I think that is such an important thing, because so many people just want to feel better, but they don't really know what that actually feels like. But I think peace is a really good way of describing it. And the other thing that you talked about, which is so important, and I also think, you know, what you learn in the journey of recovery is it sets you up with a blueprint for how to be a good human.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being honest and being kind and being humble and being of service, I think, are all things that, as humans, if we can all be like that, we will all help each other to be the best version of ourselves that we can be. Yeah. But we're not taught it, are we? We're not taught it by our parents. We're not taught it at school. And so you have to learn it. And you need somebody to teach you it. And the rooms are brilliant for doing that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to that holding up of a mirror, is understanding where your bad points are, if you want to call it that, and then working on them so that you don't do those things anymore, and, you know, understanding that. And I think you're right. You know, if everybody went through a 12-step process, you know, in college or school or something, the world would be a better place.
I agree.
Because it is a design for life, as you said. You know, we talk about, you know, the steps being designed for life, and actually the addictive substance is only mentioned in the first step.
Correct.
And the other 11 steps is all about how you live your life, how you become more humble, how you help other people, how you hold that mirror up to yourself on a daily basis to say, am I doing the next right thing? Yeah, what are my motives? What are my morals doing here? And then, putting your head on the pillow at the end of the day, and with peace and serenity, and going, I was okay today. Or actually, no, I wasn't okay today, and I need to apologize to somebody tomorrow. And again, just being that good person. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. It is, for me, that life-changing experience was about a bit of, you know, getting some self-belief back in myself and some humility, and actually being a better person and being a nice person, working on those defects of character, which turned me into a bit of a dickhead at times, you know, and I try not to do that today. Doesn't mean I'm not successful every day, but I try.
But also you said now, because you've worked in rehab, so you kind of give back, and you're sharing now. You're kind of like that person who was on the end of the phone for you, who gave you hope. Mm-hmm. You now are giving back and have done in the same way. But tell us now about the business that you are building.
So my business today is I'm a business consultant, so I help businesses to grow and to change and to develop. You know, I do that through I mentioned before is a people first approach. So for me, it's looking at people, it's looking at the processes you use in your business, looking at the systems you use, and looking at the data to make informed business decisions. And it's nice because, you know, having that people first approach is, and I've seen the human impact of managing or running a business, and so that's why I always look at the people first, and being able to help people build a strategy and build a plan that helps their business to be managed in an efficient and an effective way. And, you know, I joke sometimes and say, you know, what I do is I help people sleep at night.
Nice.
Because that's what I want. You know, I want them to have a plan and a strategy in place that they know they can put their head on the pillow at night and think the business is being managed properly. The processes are in place, the systems are in place. We're using intelligent, data-driven decisions, and the people know how to use those things, and they're looked after. They're the best they can be and as motivated they can be by understanding the people at an individual level, not a one-size-fits-all. And so, you know, I do joke about it, but I genuinely mean it. You know, if I can help somebody sleep better at night by helping them manage their business better, then that's a good day for me.
It's absolutely awesome, and the fact that you are still involved with helping other people, because I think I'm very privileged. I feel that I've got 20 years of recovery from alcohol addiction under my belt. I can't say the same for exercise addiction and food addiction, because when I put down the alcohol, those two things decided to come back as my solutions. Yeah. And you realize that, yes, you can work through the steps, but you have to keep on repeating them. Well, I certainly did. And the beauty of being able to have sponsees, which is me helping other people to go through the steps, means every time I help somebody else go through them, guess what? I was going through them again for myself. And that process of revisiting and recognizing that there are always bits of us that we can uncover, and there's always bits of us that we can improve, and that it's just called living, really, without having to hold on to these, I suppose, cruxes that we turned to because we felt not good enough or not capable. When you realize that you've got a gift now, that gift of recovery that you can share with somebody else, and it gets better. And this is the beauty of it. You're 2.5 years in, and as 20 years in, all I can say is it just gets better and better. Because you learn more and more about you and your confidence, but also you learn more and more about other people, which means you're a better partner, a better husband, a better friend, a better business owner. And, you know, there is no downside to recovery. This is my point. There's only a positive. And once you get over this idea that somehow you're the flawed or you're not quite right, that you turned to stuff and you became an addict in the first place, once you can let that go and you can recognize that it is just like opening a door to a whole nother world, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, completely. And yeah, that life just gets better and better mantra is absolutely true. It's not just it's not just a cliche that you hear, you know, bandied around. And one of the beautiful things about working in recovery circles and seeing people come into the rooms for the first time is when you see the lights coming back on in their eyes, you know, and it doesn't take long, a couple of days in, a week in, 2 weeks in, and people's lights start to come back on. You start to see the colour in the skin come back, and they start to fill out a bit because, you know, depending on your substance and things, you don't eat days. But when you start to see that life coming back into somebody, it makes it all worthwhile. But, you know, the flip side of that is, you know, from someone who's in a bit of time, it takes you back to where you were as well. You see people coming in for the first time, and for me, I think I don't ever want to go back to that place where I'm having to come in for the first time again, because it was hell, you know. And seeing people in that stage of their journey is healthy for me, because it's a good reminder of where addiction takes you. Because it is easy sometimes. It's easy if you get anything and you think, oh, okay, I'm recovered. You know, maybe I could. No, I can't try again. You know, for me, there is still no concept of one, and I know that if I had one today, I would be right back to where I was. You know, getting on for 3 years ago now. no question about it. So I can't do that, and I have to see people at that stage to remind me that that's still waiting for me. That's still possible, and I don't want to be there. You know, I'm happy where I am today. I want to stay here. Thank you.
And I think that's such an important point, but it's also important to say you're not white knuckling it. You don't want to do that, because now you've not got the reasons or the thoughts of the reasons why you needed to do it in the first place, because they don't exist for you anymore. And I think it's so important for people to realize that your thinking does change, and your identity changes, so that it's not a struggle day in, day out to not use. It's actually, it's just doesn't really cross your mind, because it's just not a part of your world. Yes, you're helping people in recovery, and so you are seeing it, but you're seeing it almost as an observer now, because you're not in it anymore. And that's a wonderful place to be in. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that story, because it's so important for people to recognize there is hope, and it can hit anybody. You were successful on the outside, great marriage, got your own home, everything kind of looked rosy, but internally you were a mess. And you recognize that you hit that point for you, which was your rock bottom, where you said, I have to do something or else I would rather die. And thankfully, you didn't choose that option. You chose to get yourself to a place where you can now help other people. And it's just awesome. If you could leave our listeners with one thing from this episode, what would that be?
I think the thing that always stands out for me is there is always hope. You know, from whatever position you find yourself in, whatever depths you find yourself in, there is always hope. There is always a way out, and you know, never give up, I think, is the thing. There's always believe, and there's always hope.
Fantastic. And on that note, folks, I want to wish you a great day. I'm going to leave you with this, as I always do. We only have one life, as far as we know, and one body. So please look after it, because it is looking after you. And until next time, thank you for joining us. Jarrod, thank you so much.
Thanks, Vicky.